In the early years of World War II, Allied pilots faced a terrifying reality in the skies over the Pacific. Japanese Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters dominated aerial combat with unmatched agility, long range, and deadly precision. American and Allied aircraft struggled to keep up, often finding themselves outturned and outmaneuvered. Reports from surviving pilots described the Zero as almost supernatural, appearing suddenly, striking quickly, and disappearing before retaliation was possible. Engineers and military planners desperately searched for ways to counter this threat, but early solutions focused mainly on improving speed or armor, rather than changing how fighters delivered firepower. Traditional fighter aircraft mounted guns in the wings, requiring careful alignment so bullets converged at a specific distance. While effective under ideal conditions, this setup demanded extreme accuracy and perfect timing during high-speed dogfights. Many pilots complained that they had only seconds to fire before overshooting their targets. Amid growing frustration, one unconventional engineer proposed a radical solution: place heavy weapons directly in the aircraft's nose. The idea sounded simple but challenged decades of aviation design philosophy. Senior engineers dismissed it as unnecessary and even dangerous, arguing it would destabilize aircraft balance and complicate maintenance. Some openly mocked the proposal, believing wing guns were already perfected technology. Yet the battlefield told a different story. Allied losses continued to mount, and every engagement against the Zero reinforced the need for innovation. Unknown to the skeptics, this controversial concept would soon reshape aerial combat and turn ridicule into admiration when combat results proved impossible to ignore. The engineer behind the nosegun concept understood a key flaw in existing fighter tactics. Wing-mounted guns required convergence, bullets crossing paths at a predetermined range, usually around 300 to 400 yards. Outside that narrow distance, firepower spread too widely to inflict decisive damage. Against agile aircraft like the Zero, pilots rarely maintained the perfect firing position long enough to exploit this convergence point. The engineer reasoned that placing guns in the nose would eliminate this limitation entirely. Weapons aligned with the aircraft's centerline would fire exactly where the pilot aimed, regardless of distance. On paper, the logic was flawless. In practice, it triggered immediate criticism. Engineers worried about recoil forces affecting flight stability, and feared ammunition storage near the engine increased risk during combat damage. Others argued that concentrating guns forward would complicate cooling systems and maintenance access. The proposal earned sarcastic nicknames in workshops, with some technicians joking it belonged in experimental fantasy rather than wartime production. Still, the engineer persisted, producing calculations demonstrating improved accuracy and lethality. He argued that pilots needed simplicity under stress: aim the nose, fire, and destroy the target. War, he insisted, rewarded practical solutions, not tradition. Slowly, a small testing team agreed to evaluate the idea using modified aircraft. Even then, expectations remained low. Most participants believed trials would confirm existing skepticism. Instead, the experiments began revealing unexpected advantages. Test pilots reported easier targeting and shorter engagement times. Yet skepticism lingered. Success in controlled testing did not guarantee battlefield effectiveness. Only real combat against the feared Zero would decide whether the mocked innovation was genius or failure. Inside military hangars, aviation culture favored proven designs over risky experimentation. Engineers had spent years refining wing-mounted gun systems, carefully calculating convergence patterns and ballistic trajectories. To many veterans, abandoning this system felt like discarding hard-earned knowledge. Younger mechanics joked that nose guns were a desperate attempt to fix pilot errors rather than engineering problems. Some claimed pilots simply needed better training instead of redesigned aircraft. Meetings discussing the modification often turned heated, with senior staff warning that altering weight distribution could create dangerous flight characteristics. Aircraft balance was sacred in fighter design. Even minor changes could affect maneuverability or stall behavior. Critics predicted catastrophic instability during sharp turns, precisely the maneuvers required when fighting Japanese fighters. Rumors spread that the aircraft would become sluggish and vulnerable, yet supporters countered that improved firing accuracy might reduce the need for prolonged turning battles altogether. Instead of chasing the Zero in circles, pilots could deliver devastating bursts during brief attack windows. This philosophical divide reflected two competing visions of aerial warfare: maneuver versus firepower. Commanders hesitated, aware that adopting the wrong approach could cost lives. Nevertheless, mounting losses forced leadership to approve limited deployment. Modified fighters equipped with nose guns would enter combat quietly, without fanfare. Few expected dramatic results. For many engineers, the deployment served merely as proof that experimentation had limits. They believed combat reports would soon validate their doubts. What happened next shocked nearly everyone involved and began rewriting assumptions about how air combat should be fought. When the modified aircraft finally reached operational squadrons, pilots approached them cautiously. Rumors about instability and mechanical risk circulated widely, and some of aviators initially preferred older models. However, curiosity quickly replaced hesitation once pilots experienced the new firing system. During training flights, they discovered that aiming felt natural, almost instinctive. Instead of calculating convergence distance, they simply pointed the aircraft toward the target. Early combat encounters occurred during defensive patrols, where Allied pilots intercepted incoming Japanese formations. In one engagement, a pilot lined up briefly behind a Zero and fired a short burst. The result stunned him. Instead of scattered impacts, concentrated rounds struck the enemy aircraft's fuselage and engine simultaneously. The Zero erupted into flames almost instantly. After landing, the pilot reported that he had fired for less than 2 seconds. Maintenance crews initially suspected exaggeration, but gun camera footage confirmed the account. Similar reports followed within days. Pilots described shorter dogfights and increased confidence during attacks. The new system allowed them to fire effectively even during high-speed passes. Reducer. Exposure to enemy counterfire. Word spread rapidly through squadrons, though engineers back home remained cautious. They demanded more data before declaring success. Yet statistics began telling a compelling story. Engagement success rates improved, and pilots survived encounters that previously would have ended disastrously. The mocked nose guns were proving not only viable, but transformative. Still, the most dramatic demonstration of their power had yet to occur, an event that would silence critics forever. Japanese pilots flying the Zero relied heavily on maneuverability and confidence built from early war victories. They expected Allied fighters to engage in turning battles, where the Zero excelled. Nose-gun aircraft changed this dynamic completely. Allied pilots adopted aggressive interception tactics, attacking with brief, precise firing passes, rather than prolonged dogfights. In one notable encounter, an American pilot executed a frontal attack against an approaching Zero formation, a maneuver previously considered extremely risky. As the aircraft closed rapidly, he fired directly along his flight path. Concentrated fire struck the lead Zero before it could evade. Observers later described the enemy fighter breaking apart mid-air, its structure unable to withstand the focused barrage. The engagement ended within seconds. Returning pilots described the effectiveness most with disbelief. Engineers reviewing damage analysis realized that concentrated nose fire delivered far greater structural stress than dispersed wing gun hits. Instead of peppering targets with scattered bullets, the new system inflicted catastrophic damage instantly. Japanese pilots began encountering opponents who no longer played by familiar rules. Reports from enemy sources suggested confusion about why Allied fighters suddenly seemed more lethal. Tactical balance in the Pacific skies began shifting subtly but decisively. The once mocked design was not merely an improvement. It fundamentally altered combat geometry. For the first time, Allied pilots possessed a weapon system capable of neutralizing the Zero's advantages quickly and decisively. The defining moment occurred during a fierce engagement when a pilot equipped with nose guns intercepted a Zero attempting evasive maneuvers. Instead of chasing through turns, the pilot anticipated the enemy's path and fired a controlled burst as the Zero crossed his sights. Witnesses later described an astonishing sight. Concentrated fire tore through the aircraft's center, effectively splitting it apart. Debris scattered across the sky as the fighter disintegrated. Ground observers exaggerated the event by saying the aircraft had been sawed in half, a phrase that quickly spread through squadrons. While technically dramatic, the ACE description captured the essence of what had happened. Concentrated nose fire delivered devastating structural destruction. Combat footage reinforced the story, leaving little doubt about the system's lethality. Engineers who once mocked the concept now studied the data intensely. Structural analysis confirmed that focused impact lines caused catastrophic failure far faster than dispersed hits. The event became legendary among pilots, symbolizing innovation triumphing over skepticism. Morale soared as crews realized they finally possessed an effective counter to the Zero. What began as a ridiculed experiment transformed into one of the most respected design choices of the war. Back at engineering centers, attitudes changed rapidly. Reports once dismissed as pilot enthusiasm now arrived supported by statistics, photographs and gun camera recordings. Analysts compared kill ratios before and after nose gun deployment and found measurable improvement. Engineers re-evaluated earlier assumptions about balance and recoil, discovering that careful mounting solutions had minimized predicted problems. Some critics publicly admitted their skepticism had been misplaced. Workshops previously filled with jokes now focused on refining ammunition feeds and improving synchronization systems. The success highlighted an important wartime lesson. Innovation often comes from challenging accepted norms. Younger engineers gained confidence proposing unconventional ideas, knowing battlefield necessity could override tradition. The nose gun design became not just a technical success, but a cultural turning point within aviation engineering communities. As more squadrons adopted nose gun fighters, tactics evolved. Pilots emphasized speed, positioning, and precision firing instead of turning contests. Training manuals updated engagement strategies, encouraging quick attack passes and vertical maneuvers. The Zero's agility mattered less when fights ended in seconds. Allied formations coordinated attacks to maximize firing opportunities while minimizing exposure. The skies over the Pacific gradually shifted from chaotic dogfights to calculated strikes. Pilots described feeling empowered rather than defensive. Air superiority did not change overnight, but momentum slowly moved toward Allied forces. Confidence proved as important as technology. Allied pilots who once feared encountering Zeros began approaching missions with renewed determination, knowing their weapons delivered devastating accuracy reduced hesitation during combat. Conversely, Japanese pilots faced unexpected losses, eroding the psychological advantage they once held. Combat psychology studies later suggested that belief in superior equipment significantly influenced performance. The nose gun innovation boosted more as much as firepower, transforming mindset alongside mechanics. The success demonstrated that weapon placement mattered as much as weapon strength. Designers realized that pilot workload must remain minimal during combat. Simplifying aiming allowed pilots to focus on situational awareness rather than calculations. Future aircraft incorporated lessons learned from nose-mounted armament, influencing post-war fighter design worldwide. Military leadership quickly ordered expanded production of aircraft using centerline weapons. Factories adapted assembly lines, integrating improved mounting systems and ammunition storage solutions. Engineers refined designs to enhance reliability under harsh combat conditions. What began as experimental modification soon became standard practice across multiple aircraft models. Japanese forces attempted to adapt tactics, avoiding head-on engagements and relying more on surprise attacks. However, shifting strategy required retraining and coordination difficult to achieve during wartime pressure. The technological balance had already shifted, limiting the effectiveness of countermeasures. Post-war aircraft designers adopted nose-mounted cannons and guns almost universally. Jet fighters benefited especially from centerline weapon alignment, proving the concept's long-term value. The once mocked idea shaped decades of aviation development, influencing AI, aircraft far beyond World War II. The engineer who proposed nose guns eventually received recognition, though often quietly compared to frontline heroes. His persistence demonstrated how innovation requires resilience against criticism. Wartime urgency rewarded results, not reputation. The story of the Zero sword in half became symbolic of wartime innovation. It represented how unconventional thinking could overcome seemingly unbeatable advantages. Engineers learned humility, pilots gained confidence, and aerial warfare entered a new era defined by precision and practicality. The mocked nose guns ultimately proved that progress often begins with an idea others laugh at, until reality proves them wrong.